So this is the first time I'm giving this talk. I'm actually preparing it for Circle CityCon next month. So if you have any feedback for me at the end, I'll be probably going to Nightlight to get dinner after this, or you can catch me afterwards if you have any thoughts. I was still editing it up until about an hour before I left to come here. So first off, I've been working with a bunch of people on this, and a big thanks to Kate here for coming up with the name of this. I couldn't name this talk to save my life. But so a bit about me for those of you that don't know me. My name is Chris Maddalena, and you can find me at @cmaddalena on Twitter. That's my handle in the RC for misec. So I went to Fair State University, where I got my bachelor's in information security and intelligence. And so with that degree, I've been working in IT for about 10 years now, and probably about 8 of that, so a really good portion of it has been doing things in kind of a support role, whether that was help desk or working with other coworkers, any kind of roles where I had an interaction between myself and someone that would be more of an end user that was a lot less technical. And that's sort of what started this talk, and it's what I want to talk about today, is kind of how their understanding of the end users is different than yours or mine, people that work in IT, that work in security, or at least have that interest where they have a background in it, and how that's influenced by the media they consume, the people they talk to, what they do in their day-to-day lives, and how that actually can come back and have an impact on the security field. And near the end, we're going to discuss a couple of real-world examples of how this is actually impacting people. So to start off, I want to talk a bit about the training that we currently provide users. So users are provided with training through their workplace, but they also get training from just social interactions, stuff they see on the media. Everything kind of trains them to think a certain way about technology. And right now this is really insufficient. So training provides more of a guideline, but it lacks one really important component, which is any explanation of why they should care. It kind of tells them what they should do and when they should do it, but it doesn't tell them why any of it's important or why any of it's relevant at all. While our education kind of goes a little bit further, it takes more time and it's more of an investment, but it actually explains to the user why they should care about something, gives them a little bit of background of why any of it matters and why it works the way it works. So when we train someone without explaining why they should care about it, it doesn't really stick in any meaningful way, or they get stuck in kind of a routine where they look for specific things. Like the RSA conference from last month, a lot of changes in phishing from 2014 to just the first few months of 2015 have been we've seen a huge downturn in any kind of phishing email related to social media and things like that, because we've been nailing users with this training of saying, look out for social media, links, look out for anything that could be a little bit fishy, for bad pun that I didn't mean to make. So, look out for anything like that. And then now we've seen a huge uptick in the number of phishing emails that are completely unrelated, and are, more things like fake receipts and things like that, because the people sending out those emails have realized that we've been training users to look for a certain thing. They're still looking for that, so they've gone over there to come in a different way. Because we never really explained why they should be looking at their email closely. We told them what to look for and how to look for it. So, kind of detour for a minute and actually talk about why this is relevant to you or to me. So, what we're going to discuss today affects everyone. And it kind of has a really special effect on younger generations, especially teenagers that are right now that are growing up with technology, that are using it, and they're using technology that, is brand new, and this kind of the first introduction they've had to this technology, and they don't understand how any of it works. And so to pull from one of my favorite articles written by Quinn Norton, computers and computing are broken. Kind of everything that they're using is broken in some fundamental way. All the technology we have right now is built upon fundamental technology that came before it that is itself broken. So in some way, everything we have is broken in 100 different little tiny ways. We're always patching things. We're always trying to fix it. Those people that are a little bit more tech savvy understand how they can work around problems and bugs or security pitfalls, things like that. But the end users don't understand that. They don't even realize that their phone is kind of broken out of the box. There's a whole bunch of ways it can break and need to be rebooted, and things like that can go wrong. And we need to understand that in order to actually be able to educate users properly. And I've seen some pushback on that idea from where people believe that, well, no, if we start from the point of view of that everything is broken, then users are going to see it more as a Band-Aid fix. Why should I care? It's broken, it'll be fixed later, and it'll be different, I don't care. But it actually kind of goes back to that difference between training and education, where if we educate them, letting them know this is broken and this is why you should care about it, because what you're using isn't perfect. You have a bunch of imperfect technology that a whole bunch of little can get you along the way. That if they can understand that, they can actually be a little bit more prepared to absorb information about it and be more prepared to respond to problems and protect themselves. And kind of in the bigger picture, the longer we let it go without educating users, there's greater and greater repercussions for the security industry. For example, we've already been seeing a couple of those repercussions in the form of the proposed changes of the CFAA, as well as kind of go back to the RSA conference again, the recent announcement from Rapid7 on how they're going to have to be changing the Metasploit Pro licensing and Metasploit community licensing. Is that, if you're unaware of that, because Metasploit contains encryption, and encryption since 1992 has been classified as munitions, there's actually stronger, they're now finally applying stronger export policy on Metasploit Pro and encryption. So whereas now if you don't live in the United States or Canada, you actually have to go through an additional process with Rapid7 where you need to basically write them a letter explaining why they should give you a Metasploit license and why you're going to use it, what you need it for, how it will be applied, and all that gets turned over to the US government so they can basically approve that, yeah, okay, they can have Metasploit. And that's just going to kind of continue to be worse the further we go. And we'll talk a little bit more on that subject in a little bit. But to go back to then why it's relevant to the end users, that even though we're kind of talking about how a lot of stuff is broken, it's not preventing us from seeing a whole bunch of really great technology coming to the market, and with tons of adoption from the end users. And a big part of that has, of course, been touchscreens on cell phones and tablets. They have a constant internet connection now, and this is really helping users get connected, and they're actually using the internet more than they did before, because these are people who used to struggle to do anything with a PC, but now have something they can take out of their pocket or keep on an end table that's really simple to use and gets them connected without any hassle. And now they also have the motivation to use it. With social media, email, games, everything that's taking them online and directing them to links, they actually are getting out there and using that stuff, whereas before they used to kind of be afraid of it. So Douglas Engelbart, who you might recognize him as the guy who invented the mouse, before he died, he called touch interfaces point and grunt interfaces, because he did not like how they really simplified things. You can really only tap on something, maybe tap and hold. There's very little you can do with it. But what he probably didn't see in his lifetime was how easily that allowed people to actually connect to things and use that technology, where he was more of a fan of complicated keyboard shortcuts mixed with mouse movements, things like that, that you could have more physical interaction with end users as much as touchscreens have. The problem, of course, with this is also the kind of wonderful thing is that it's allowing users to get comfortable online. They're creating kind of comfortable little silos for themselves to live in online, where it's just their friends. They're all just kind of sharing their own links. They're talking about subjects that make them comfortable. They're not often going out too far out of that comfort zone. And they start to feel safe, and they feel safe to explore. But of course, with that safety, that perceived safety, comes kind of the downside, which is their utter lack of understanding of how any of it really works makes them really easy targets for scammers and criminals. And now these users are coming in contact with more and more of these criminals online than they have in the past, because it's much easier to get in touch with them. And so we have social media links that are just full of, there's phishing links, they're malware. Not to mention we have problems with tablets and phones are easily lost and stolen. They're full of private information, and none of them are really being password protected as well as they should be. And even when they are being password protected, it's usually, they're just drawing a square on the screen, or it's something really quick they can type in 1, 2, 3, 4. And we're also seeing that with passwords too, whereas passwords have never really been that great, but now they have to worry about, well, I'm going to enter this on my phone, so I don't want to put any special characters in it. I don't want to use capital letters because then I have to hit that extra key, and and they want to go for shorter passwords because otherwise they screw it up and they have to keep re-entering it. And we also it's not even just touchscreens. We're also seeing that with gamepads, anything like that, accounts that are now linked to a PlayStation or an Xbox console, anything like that where they might have to use a method like a game controller or a phone to input the password. They're gravitating more for a simpler password, which then, if they lose that device, makes it even easier for someone to get into it. And where this ends up leading is that kind of one of two paths for the end user. They either remain ignorant of how all this works, they sort of just keep going along their way, maybe nothing happens to them, or they kind of end up just coincidentally, along with their lack of understanding, they're reckless and they end up causing problems for themselves. Or the other path, they just kind of learn to fear the technology and they want to stay away from it and they don't trust it, and they perhaps make even worse mistakes. They make blind decisions. And these blind decisions, just lead to uneducated users that don't understand the technology they're using, and they start to, call for things like the changes to the CFAA, things like that, because they don't understand what that does, because they don't understand even what they're trying to fight against. But this fear doesn't come from nowhere. They have to actually have someone, plant the idea. And so one of the sources of that fear is what I just referred to as counter-programming. It's a lot of it comes from the entertainment and news, various media, just the stuff they're watching on TV or reading online, and it ends up actually countering our efforts to educate them. It's corporate training, friendly advice, things like that, is competing against whatever they read on Facebook or see on CSI Cyber. And I'm kind of picking on CSI Cyber just because it's kind of new, and it's funny, it's a goofy show, but really it's shows like this that the users, the people that are watching this, understand it's not real. There's going to be very few people out there that would probably seriously say they believe everything they see on CSI Cyber to be true, but it does create these sort of dangerous gray areas. Like, if you're like me, you've probably had at least some interaction with a family member or friend while watching, some sort of cop procedural or something like that, where something stupid's happened on the TV and they've sort of turned to you and like, oh, you really can't do that, right? And they're asking because they know that it was ridiculous, but there was some part of them that knows that technology is really amazing, we're able to do astounding stuff, and they know there's a lie in there somewhere, but they don't know where that line is. Where was it that they started exaggerating? And without someone to say, no, it was up to this point, it was true, or you could have done that, but not the rest of the stuff, they sort of start to draw their own conclusions. And while they might not believe everything they see, they do see something that they think probably could happen, and that starts this sort of growing fear that once it gets mixed with what they see in newspapers and online, they start to come up with their own stories and narratives of how things are going. So the other two things I have on the slide are some headlines from about the past 6 months or so from the Washington Post and the New York Times. The first one is, we're actually going to talk about this a little bit more in depth in a later slide, because it's a pretty ridiculous interview, was a interview that a journalist had with someone who claimed to be a member of the Lizard Squad. And the second one is an article that got passed around a lot a few months ago from the New York Times, just kind of covering how Edward Snowden got some of the information he did while he was at the NSA. And it's really just kind of a fluff piece that talks about the tools they use, like wget, but they surround everything in scare quotes. He scraped this using wget and everything. They make it sound really scary, really technical, when all they're saying is, well, he just downloaded some stuff. But they go this extra mile to make it sound scary and technical, because the targeted audience is the people who don't know any better. And what they're actually doing is just kind of creating this idea that, oh, he used low-cost tools. Well, they were free. They're not even, they're trying to make it easy, like, look how easily he did this. But we know, but again, it adds to this weird narrative of these gray areas kind of all coming together, and the users end up making up their own stories. And this kind of leads to warped touchstones and facts that they don't understand. So yeah, another screenshot from, I think, this first episode of CSI Cyber. And so this, like our favorite touchstone, so just take the word hack, for example. These touchstones should communicate something. The only way that they can work and act as a keyword is if they are able to be weighty and carry meaning. So if I come up to you and I ask you if you saw that hack on the news last night, I'm not trying to insult a news anchor, that I'm probably referring to some sort of security breach. But that's where your brain goes, where that's what you're talking about. If I go up to someone else and ask them the same question, they might assume that I'm talking about a hack news anchor, something like that. I'm using the word differently because they have a different understanding of it. So the media, in kind of all of its forms, TV, newspaper, websites, they're taking a lot of the keywords that we use, sort of like that New York Times article, and they misuse them. And it's not such a big deal. Words get misused all the time. But the problem is that then when we try to educate users, we're sort of stubbornly using those same words as if they've never had any other meaning. And we say, this is what this word means, this is how I'm using it, without explaining those words, because we're not breaking it down, trying to be a bit more simplistic. And what the users hear are words that they've assigned different meaning to, because they picked up that word. They might have learned that word from reading a New York Times article or something like that, where it was misused or a different meaning was applied to it. Remember, they're learning all this stuff from context. So we kind of take it for granted that they'll understand what we're talking about, even when we don't think we're using technical terms, because these are terms that they've learned to assign something different to. And to kind of go back to some of the earlier stuff we were talking about, these are people who have learned, for example, that it can be dangerous. They're taking some sort of risk every time they use their credit card online. But throughout the past 5 years or so, where I work pretty closely with software licensing for a software company, the number of users we would get that would send us their full billing information and credit card information in an email and say, please give me one license for this, for this much, and invoice me, was kind of astounding. And I was surprised the first few times I saw it, but when we got a few every month, because these people would say oftentimes in their email, I know it seems weird, but I don't trust putting my credit card on a website. And obviously that they're doing something even worse. But they understand, like, no, I'm going to be clever. I'm going to beat that risk. I'm not even going to take that risk. I'm just going to email this to them and just have them take care of it for me. I'd rather work with the person than go through the website, because they don't understand how that whole process works, that, what happens to their credit card after it gets stolen, or how any of that plays out. And I've been picking on the media, but it's not just the media either. We have all kinds of little examples you can find, like this wonderful Spotify alert that should probably just say the Spotify installation is corrupted and ask you to reinstall it, but instead it goes the extra step of suggesting that maybe you've picked up a virus, and then offer nothing, just maybe it's been affected by a virus. The end. Please download Spotify again. It serves no purpose other than to kind of instill this fear in the user of, like, I don't know, do I have a virus? I don't know. So let's take a kind of a look at how the word hack has changed. It's sort of a brief history of that word. It's really, the way we use the word hack is only about 50 years old or so. But hack has been around since the early 13th century. It started off as a word that referred to someone you would hire for rough labor or a horse. And it took about 200 years, and it was applied to prostitutes. And about 200 years later after that, it meant taxi cab drivers. And then about 100 years, it started being used as an insult to refer to someone as a hack. It then took about another 150 years until 1976 that it started being used in the form of hacker, as someone that, as to kind of quote the dictionary, someone who enjoys programming for its own sake. Then it took a mere 8 years for it to take a negative twist, where it now means one who gains unauthorized access to computer records. And that's kind of interesting, because the way we use the word hack, we're kind of clinging to that 1976 version, whereas the media is sort of using that 1984 version. And there's a little bit of that, a tug of war between who's right and who's wrong, and what's the proper word. Is it positive or is it negative to be a hacker? And so now that we've talked about hack, let's talk about everyone's favorite word to hate, cyber. So kind of the funny thing about cyber is that, unlike hack, it's actually been pretty stable. It sort of means the same thing no matter who's using it. Yeah, it's a bit too flexible and kind of has a very nebulous meaning. You throw it in front of a word and it means computer. But at the same time, when you talk to just kind of anyone on the street, you mention the word cyber, they get some idea what you're talking about. There's no misunderstanding. You put that word in front of something, or I work in cybersecurity. For some reason, that makes more sense to them than if you say I work in information security or I work in computer security. It just has been ingrained in them to understand it a certain way because the media uses it so much. And so these two words, hack and cyber, have kind of become these really important touchstones for us. But right now, like I said, there's kind of this tug of war of which side is right. The security community embraces hacker as a word that has a lot of flavor and history. We love what it means because, like I said, we cling to that 1976 version where we really like that it means we love these things, we love lockpicking, we do all this other stuff because it's cool and we want to do that. We want to learn about this stuff. Whereas the media kind of takes that extra spin of no, it's a bad thing. A hack is just something that happened with a computer and a network. It was some sort of attack. It was a very negative thing. The hacker, the people behind it, the bad guys in the story. And they don't, or at least very rarely, use it as a positive thing. And so what is a hack today? So what we would probably refer to as maybe an attack or just vandalism is kind of reported as a hack. Just that's all the media really ever uses to refer to these sorts of security breaches, or everything from a DDoS to website defacement, Twitter vandalism, all the way up to actually a major security breach with a bunch of stolen data is referred to as a hack. And that's not such a big deal, but at the same time, it does mean that in the eyes of the readers or the people watching the news, the end users, is that they're seeing a DDoS put on the same level as a major data breach. Just someone taking advantage of an architectural flaw in the internet and someone actually exploiting some vulnerabilities, stealing data, causing actual damage. So we know that back in January, the U.S. Central Command was not hacked. Twitter was, or at least their Twitter account was. And even then, that's kind of a stretch. Because do we really want someone, referring to someone guessing someone else's password as a hack? Probably not. There might have been maybe some, more technical stuff going on, but around the same time as the story came out, there was another story, a bunch of interviews with some DC interns that say that passwords are just kind of up on Post-it notes on bulletin boards. They're spoken aloud in Starbucks or on the street, sent via text message, whatever. Any means that they can get it to someone, they'll use it. Because so many people need access to various things like the Twitter accounts or an email account. So passwords aren't really guarded secrets. And so kind of the better question that I didn't really see asked around this time was, why weren't they using two-factor authentication on this? Or what was their incident response like to this? How quickly did they respond to this and get it taken down and clean it up? The bigger problem, though, was that kind of the reason that those questions weren't being asked is that it's so nice for them to be able to lines that suggest that a government entity has been compromised. It makes some really great clickbait headlines and generates a lot of traffic. So we get these tons and tons of stories about how the U.S. Central Command was hacked. Now, of course, ridiculous headlines are nothing new, but to kind of go back to that point I was trying to make about how we're kind of putting everything on the same level. This was I just did a DuckDuckGo search for Lizard Squad hack Sony, And these are the first few results I got, and actually they're all very different. So they all have very similar headlines, but only that first one refers to an actual data breach, which is the Sony Motion Pictures data breach. The others refer to Sony Online Entertainment and the PlayStation Network getting brought down by the two DDoS from that the Lizard Squad took credit for back in December. And then a couple of them were just kind of fluff pieces on talking about who the Lizard Squad is and kind of giving them publicity. But they're all reported as, how they hacked Sony and did all this stuff. Whereas, so it looks kind of a lot worse there that there's all these stories on it when really there's only one story on an actual data breach. And that's sort of the problem. Is that, like I said, clickbait headlines are nothing new, but it does become a problem when the story itself is actually not even worth reading, when the story itself is also a problem. When it's just there to kind of generate fear or, sow the seeds of, or twist facts that don't mean anything, that are just untrue. But yet still, just like the headlines, FUD articles aren't anything new either. But I argue that these are worth paying attention to because regular FUD articles that are just, worrying about what's in your water or things like that are just trying to get you to come to the website aren't as harmful as something that can actually it can actually affect the user directly, can affect the reader directly by giving them bad advice or give them a misunderstanding of the technology they're using every day. The bigger problem is the journalists that are writing these are also have the same understanding. You can argue that they should do their research and understand it, but again, a lot of what they're able to find is just training. Or they talk to people, they get very simple explanations, and they kind of draw their conclusions from there. Or it's what they're reporting on is so technical, they think they have an understanding of it, and they just really don't. And their editor and the journalist and other people there that might, be able to stop it along the way also don't understand that the article is mistaken. So this was the Washington Post article that I mentioned on one of those first slides that I said we were going to take a little bit deeper dive into. So late last year / early this year, there was a couple of interviews from the BBC and the Washington Post with the Lizard Squad. And the BBC interview was kind of good for some laughs. The BBC didn't seem to take them too seriously. It wasn't the worst thing. It was kind of dumb that they interviewed them at all, seeing as at that point they were just basically wanted felons, more or less, and didn't really have anything interesting to say for themselves. But the Washington Post article was really awful. Basically, everything that led up to it was kind of made it even worse. So the journalist reached out to someone or was contacted by a guy that said he was part of the Lizard Squad, said he was an administrator, and identified himself as Ryan Cleary. This was about a week after an person named Ryan Cleary that was actually arrested in the UK for being a part of the Lizard Squad and being associated with the DDoS against Sony and Microsoft and Blizzard. After he was arrested, this guy says that he has the same name, which was probably a red flag, and maybe that's why the journalist asked the guy to identify himself on Twitter. Said, if you're an administrator, tweet to me from the Lizard Squad Twitter account. All the guy did was he went and he created a new account with the same avatar, changed like the I to an L, just changed one letter, tweeted at the guy. The account had one tweet. That was it. It was up for a couple of hours before the guy deleted the account, deleted the tweet, got rid of everything, but it was enough to convince the journalist, like, oh yeah, I'm talking to a legit guy. He has control of the Twitter account, so he must be someone I want to talk to. And throughout the entire interview, you almost get the picture of the journalist just kind of sitting at the edge of his seat, like, yeah, tell me more. Oh my gosh, I can't believe this. Like he's getting a bunch of scoops. Like you can kind of see the guy comes out with statements like, and this is in regards to their Christmas Day DDoS where they brought down PlayStation Network and Microsoft Live or Xbox Live and Blizzard's Battle.net, just to kind of rain on everyone's Christmas. You can't play your video games today. We're going to take down the services. And he says, Sony made a deal with a large DDoS protection company, Prolexic, after apparently deciding they stood no chance against us. Like it's just total ludicrous statements like this throughout the interview, and he's taken completely seriously. And the comments on this interview, the people that left comments weren't buying what the guy had to say. But the problem is the people who didn't leave the comments. The people who came to the Washington Post, an actual institution that they recognize as being a credible news organization, and they read this, they saw a group of kids being taken very seriously. And when they talked about how they were, really putting the screws to Microsoft and Sony and kind of bringing down corporations and causing all these problems, they were taken, again, completely seriously. And that's kind of scary. It's, I don't know why. So it creates this fear where they don't understand why a bunch of kids are able to do this and get away with it. And meanwhile, while these kind of things are being posted in the regular media, the security community wasn't taking them very seriously, of course. We were referring to them as the Skitty Squad, the Loser Squad, kind of making fun of them. Brian Krebs, even though he kind of perhaps gets some credit for helping track them down, was just on Twitter egging them on and making fun of them. Like, no one was out there trying to say, like, no, these guys, they're just a bunch of losers. They'll be arrested in a couple of weeks. Don't worry about them. They're nothing. They were being taken completely seriously and kind of adding to this bigger picture of like, oh, there's all these elusive hackers out there that are causing all these problems. We really need to take them down and do something. And somehow there's a slide that is not where it should be. So this creates a cause and effect where lawmakers are put under pressure to defend against these hackers, these elusive, numerous hackers that are all over the place, and they're all apparently a bunch of 13-year-olds with laptops, and we really need to, get these kids to stop. And so this leads to them feeling like, well, I need to do something. So they start to do things like proposing changes to the CFAA, proposing harsher punishments for hacking, that, of course, we know starts to become really way too broad, and they actually start almost, being anti-security researcher more than anti-hacker. And this really starts to scare and anger people when they're not seeing a lot of, effect from it. Because, of course, these laws aren't stopping, the DDoSes and things like that. In fact, DDoS is kind of becoming more of a toy, more of a tool that people are using to troll people. So it's just really becoming more numerous. These events are more numerous rather than going down. And so they want to see the hackers pay for their vandalism. And this leads to just a whole group, a whole section of the public that's just unnerved and upset, and they want to see something done. Again, because they don't understand the technology they're using. And they don't understand that what they're kind of the heads they're calling for aren't worth it. They're not the people they need to be worried about. And so they're kind of looking over here while the bad stuff's over there and getting really riled up over all the wrong stuff. Meanwhile, their training is really focused on enterprise security. None of it is letting them know that they're actually still in danger at home. So again, while they're being riled up over people attacking Sony and Microsoft, they don't understand that they're actually in danger at home, that they're still expecting that if they get malware, they'll see a bunch of pop-ups, so their computer's going to get really slow. Their antivirus will surely stop it, so unless they see any odd behavior, they're good. And they don't realize that they could just become part of a botnet and actually kind of aid in some of the hacks that they're railing against. Or that, a rat could be installed, and they start, they're being spied on, or their, personal information is being siphoned off their computer. They don't understand that could be happening to them because they're focused on something else from the training they've been given. And I know this is really kind of hard to look at, but that's sort of the point too, is that this is how the malware that's actually affecting users today has evolved. This is, of course, CryptoLocker 1.0, and then its later iteration 2.0. I think it's up to 4 or 5 now. But we know that while they're expecting malware to come in the form of a bunch of pop-ups or things that just kind of hurt their computer, and they, this is really what's out there to get them right now, is the ransomware and much more sophisticated malware. And so they kind of assume that they're safe if they avoid porn or anything that might be considered shady on the internet, when really that's not the case anymore. In fact, if you saw the news a couple of weeks ago, and a different version, one of the kind of CryptoLocker competitors, CryptoWall, actually was discovered to being using compromised ads through the DoubleClick network. And they were installing CryptoWall on computers just from people that were unlucky enough to visit totally legitimate websites like the Huffington Post while the malicious ad was in rotation. So they got probably thousands of people infected with CryptoWall through these malicious ads before it was caught. They were using a 0-day vulnerability in Flash that once Adobe caught up with that and released an update, they were actually even then smart enough to completely kill their campaign immediately. They were willing to take the risk of infecting thousands of people all at once to really draw attention to themselves while that vulnerability was unpatched. As soon as it was patched, they didn't care if people wouldn't get the update very quickly. They knew that once the risk went up, they killed it, so that we still don't know how they started the attack, how they actually infected the ads. So they could do it again once there's a new vulnerability in Flash that perhaps allows them to do it. They could come back for one more go at something like this. And again, that was just visiting websites like the Huffington Post. That could have gotten anyone, even someone who was aware of how they could be infected. But so CryptoWall, of course, is kind of a competitor to CryptoLocker, and we're seeing more and more of this where different sort of forks of this ransomware is out there. But kind of the most interesting one is TeslaCrypt, which is much easier to look at than CryptoLocker there. And this is really the future. This thing has been designed from the ground up to appear professional. It's even using kind of a more modern flat UI. That barcode actually works. It's got a color scheme going for it. They've even gone as far as you got your files, and just in case you think there's something wrong with your computer, here you can give them one free file, your most important Word document or something, and they'll decrypt it for you, but you're going to have to pay for the rest of it. And they're going even further now. They realize that, say, CryptoLocker had a really great idea, but what if I get onto a computer that doesn't have a bunch of important files or pictures? Well, then I've kind of wasted the infection. It's a dud. Well, wait. What computer doesn't have something on it that I can infect that someone would want to pay for? So they've started targeting gamers. So now if it infects a computer that maybe doesn't have any documents that you care about, well, it's going to encrypt your entire World of Warcraft installation. It encrypts your Steam installation, all your game saves. It starts targeting all the locations it knows that are common for game saves. They've also then released a version that now will target Dropbox. So it'll encrypt your Dropbox and also put a copy of itself on Dropbox in hopes of infecting other PCs that you have. Does the same thing with network shares that are currently connected. It's doing its best to hit every location where it thinks it could get some kind of file to get decrypted. And then trying to then get you, while you're looking over here, what about this computer, it's trying to infect another PC on your network to try to milk you for as much money as you can.
Message center too.
Yeah, I'd really love to see what the. But yeah, again, there's someone that's watching that. Like they're making enough money off of this that they were probably able to pay someone to put this together. Put this little front end together for them. And we know that these have been very lucrative, but kind of think about the CryptoWall example of how easy it was for them to infect thousands of users. And then even if 1% of those users actually paid for them to do it, then they get their money. And they get a lot of money. So the users don't really understand. And while they haven't really been paying attention, malware went from just kind of a menace, a technology issue, to it's really more of a public health issue at this point. In fact, it could kind of literally be a public health issue, since we've seen police stations, hospitals, radio stations. This can be any computer. And the idea that you could go to actually use a computer that you need to pull up a patient record or something that you need access to right away, and you just get a prompt like that without anyone having really done anything nefarious, except a nurse went and looked at the Huffington Post to look, was browsing the news earlier. That's kind of frightening. So now I want to take a little bit of a turn to talk about sort of a different hazard that affects users as well, which is just, again, kind of their misunderstanding of how the internet works, how their apps work. They just kind of have these little black boxes with an internet connection that they install apps on, and they don't really know how it works. They don't understand, for example, how when they take a picture with Snapchat, what has to go on for them to be able to send the image or the video, actually have the internet facilitate the delivery of that video, and then what happens on the other end for it to kind of self-destruct and be deleted. And of course, they don't know to ask these questions. They sort of trust that, hey, you know, all my friends are using Snapchat. Snapchat promises sort of this self-destructing MMS message. I'm going to trust that that's true. It comes back and bites some of them. For example, in the event from last year that was, you know, just referred to as the snapping, which was the release of 90,000 images and 9,000 videos that were taken with Snapchat. Of course, the release was facilitated by the fact that they used a third-party service called SnapSave to save their Snapchats, which at the same time you would think would have educated the users like, hey, if this third-party service that its entire point is to save snaps, maybe there's other ways that my Snapchats could be saved, and they would maybe just go away from the service or use it for different things. They didn't really seem to learn that. In fact, Snapchat says that they're getting, you know, more and more users every day, and more snaps are being sent every day. Meanwhile, their response to the snapping was actually pretty cold. That's an excerpt from their official statement, which basically said that, well, the users did it themselves, they violated our terms of use, so too bad. Which is fair. They, you know, but at the same time, it didn't help the users that had their photos leaked when they thought that they were safe. But again, it was kind of their misunderstanding of how any of that system worked that led to that eventual release of their photos. And so I mentioned Snapchat because it's more relevant for the next thing I want to talk about, which is the last thing we'll cover. This is their official Snapchat marketing statistics. This is like what they showed their advertisers. And what I want to call out here is that 50% of their users are between the ages of 13 to 17, so they're minors. And the next 31% are 18 to 24, so they're also pretty young. But it's that 50% that are minors that is pretty interesting because you have to imagine that even if and they're just using Snapchat because it's a popular service, because what Snapchat is promising, which is we'll deliver a photo that then can't be saved, they can't do anything with it, it just deletes itself and you're good. They can't really deliver that because they can take a screenshot, they could just take another camera phone or another camera of some kind and snap a picture. That photo isn't gone from existence once it gets sent. And not to mention the fact that just in that process of transmitting it could be intercepted, it could be also, we know that Snapchat, if you use it, they keep the snaps for a certain amount of time. It's from when it gets viewed. You don't know that the person that you sent it to is the one who's going to get to view it. You don't know who else is going to be there, etc. There's all kinds of things that these users don't really think about because they're not wired to think that way. They've been promised a thing, and that's how they kind of expect it to work. And it's that sort of thinking that led to a problem last April, so actually April 2014, in Central Virginia. And basically the short version of what happened was a mother of a high school student came across an Instagram account by accident, found it on her daughter's phone, and it was full of thousands of some just kind of inappropriate, but all the way to nude and kind of really ridiculous photos of about 100 teenage girls. And they were all people that she recognized, people that she knew went to her daughter's school. So, and kind of on top of that, these were all girls between the ages of 15 and 17. So it was basically an Instagram account full of child pornography. And it was a public account on top of it. So obviously the police had to be involved, the school administration had to be involved, and so they started talking to the kids at the school to find out where did these photos come from, how did they end up on Instagram. And what they found was that after they basically interviewed every single kid at the school, they searched everyone's phone because they believed that's where the photos were coming from, and they were right. And many of them admitted, no, I took the picture, I recognized that picture of myself, I took it and I sent it to so-and-so. And it was supposed to be just for him, it wasn't supposed to go to anywhere else. And they were obviously mortified that it was up on the internet. But they were also surprised that some of the girls they talked to said, oh no, I took that, it's for the account. I sent it to so-and-so so they could upload it to Instagram. And what they found was that this Instagram account had been created. They think, they haven't really been able to confirm this, and no one's been prosecuted or anything. But they believe that from the story they've been able to piece together, it was basically the boys at the school were getting lots of nude pictures sent to them. They were sharing them already, text messaging or just showing each other. And someone finally had the idea, said, hey, there should just be a way for us to dump these somewhere so we can all go look at them whenever we want. And, they can't be found on our phones by our parents. So someone said, hey, let's put them on Instagram. Well, of course, they had to make a public account, but they thought, well, Instagram accounts are basically private as long as you don't tell anyone about them. So we're just going to put a special hashtag on all the photos that unless you know the hashtag, you'll never find the pictures. And you got the hashtag if you submitted a photo. So sort of your price of admission was, hey, here's a photo I was sent that you don't have yet. Cool, they upload it and they give you the hashtag. So you can go look at all the other photos. So once they knew this, they found actually 2 other accounts just like this from 2 other schools that were nearby. Some crossover in photos, but like a whole new group of teenagers. Again, basically just Instagram accounts of child porn. And they ended up with just a wall of their evidence room full of bins full of phones. Because every time they talked to a kid, they had to confiscate the phone because it essentially was a device that contained child pornography because it was full, even though some of them were pictures that they had taken of themselves or pictures they had received, that's by law, they have to seize it. They eventually stopped because it was just becoming ridiculous. And they knew that they weren't going to charge any of these kids with, and even though they technically were at this point child pornographers and distributors. So this was kind of their encounter with what law enforcement refers to as self-production. So by law, even though they took the picture themselves, it is still child pornography because it is self-produced. By law, that still makes them felons. Now, thankfully, this turned out okay for these group of girls, and no one was charged. No one is now on a sex offender list. They were really fortunate there that no one, wanted to really kind of put the screws to them or anything like that. Obviously, the girls will have to live with the fact that these were up on the internet and you don't really know what happened with the pictures, but thankfully, no one was too severely traumatized by it. At least, no one was. There was some bullying and some kind of nasty rumors apparently that were started around the school, but for the most part, it kind of went over because they found out that when they interviewed the kids estimated somewhere between, the lowest estimate was 60% of the school was involved, the highest estimate was 80%. So, which was, they couldn't believe it, but there was actually, around the same time as this was going on, a study in East Texas where they asked sophomores and juniors at a high school of how many of them had sent a nude photo to someone, and 28% of them admitted they had. So if you take into account maybe the freshmen and the seniors that they didn't talk to at all, maybe kids who lied or just hadn't done it yet, you can probably say that there's probably a solid third of the high school students that are sending pictures. And this is the sort of thinking that's going through their head. This is what they think. This was just a gross misunderstanding of technology. They didn't think that you could find an Instagram account unless you knew their password. They didn't admitting a felony. They just thought they were having some, teenage fun and sharing some pictures, but really they just kind of presented themselves as a good example of why why these teenagers are kind of our most vulnerable group right now when it comes to technology. Like I said, luckily it turned out pretty well for these group of kids, but it could have gone pretty poorly. There was actually in 2008 a very, very minor incident compared to this one where a single nude photo got shared around a very small group of people, and that girl actually unfortunately killed herself over the incident. So kind of perhaps because there was so much of it involved here, there was support or things like that, or just because there was so much involvement from adult photo can actually cause a big problem. And that's just, again, a misunderstanding of how the technology can be used or misused, and can actually have a really profound effect on some very young people that then they would have to live with whatever that effect is for the rest of their lives. So what, kind of the next question, of course, is what can we do about any of this? And the biggest thing that we can do, the best thing, is actually share the wealth of knowledge that we have in the security community. So we have a ton of knowledge, a ton of really great talks, papers, little personal blog posts, things like that get shared around between us on Twitter, but they kind of never really leave the echo chamber. We don't really share them too much with other people because we think, it's too technical, you're not going to sit down and watch a 45-minute talk. But you might be surprised if you're ever in a situation where you see something you really like, bookmark it, keep it around, and then you might find someone asks you a question, you just do not have the time to sit there and actually give them a full explanation. Send them the link. Whether they watch it or not, whatever. But if they do watch it, they can actually learn a bit more about what it is that they should know about their question. They actually get a more complete answer. And again, so it's kind of comes into releasing that knowledge from the echo chamber. Just get it out there, even if they don't really watch it or they only watch a part of it. Maybe they share it or they post it on Facebook or something, and more people get to watch it. But also, and this is a really great one too, if you're looking at giving a talk that maybe you don't want to give it in front of a security group yet, or you're working on it, you can go to a developer conference and give a talk, or go talk to people there. There's a little bit of a stereotype where developers, because the developers are making all these mistakes, the security people have to come in and fix and all that. But the people that you might think of as like stupid developers aren't the people that you'll find at conferences, and they're probably not the people you're working with. Just like if you go to a developer and ask them what they think of their company's security group, it's probably no one you'd ever see at a conference, and they probably would not have very nice things to say about it, and you would probably not have nice things to say about the stuff that they do or say. So there's these conferences full of very smart people that are very interested in security because they understand it, but just like no one's coming to a security conference and giving a talk on development, no one's going to developer conferences and giving talks on security, not very often anyways. And from the people that have done this, they've said that their talks just get packed. There's a lot of people there that are very interested in what they have to say because they do want to get better at security, because they do care, but they don't have a lot of resources, again, because we're kind of hiding a lot of the really good stuff we have by YouTube channels and things like that are popular among us, but not exactly out there floating around for people to find very easily. And then, of course, you can also talk to other departments and coworkers if you have an opportunity at work to give a presentation to a different department. That's a really good chance to at least explain what you do at work. And then I said we come back to the touchstones. We can use words like cyber for good. So, pay attention to the language of the users and what they have to say. Using a word differently than that's a cue to try to break it down a little bit more, and, you need to spend more time talking to them if you're going to answer their question. And, or it's an opportunity to explain something a bit more in depth. And using words like cyber, even if you really hate it and you grit your teeth every time you hear it, they at least understand it, and it's something we can use to be able to get through to them. So here is just a couple of links that some of the stuff we've talked about, the Washington Post article, the article on, actually the Atlantic did a really great article. It's a pretty long read on the Instagram thing from Central Virginia, that if you're unfamiliar with the snapping. And then also call out episode 9 of Reboot It. This was an episode that didn't come out too long ago. I think it was a couple of months ago. But they actually talk about a lot of the similar things that we talked about here today with special guest Amanda Berlin, InfoSister. They did a really great job talking about some of these topics, took a little bit of a different point of view, talked about some things a little bit differently than we did here today. So if any of this was interesting to you, give it a listen. So thanks. That's it for me.
I was sort of thinking about the Snapchat thing, the company, their statement they released.
Mm-hmm.
Do you think that statement would be different if they were a publicly traded company? Like if that happened to Facebook? There's no way they'd say that.
Oh yeah, I bet. Yeah.
Yeah.
It would at least, I think, would have been very sympathetic.
Yeah.
That one, it was very cold. If no one read it, it was basically, it was very, you violate our terms of use.
Yeah.
Go away. It's not our problem. Yeah.
Have you seen anybody applying some of this in their company awareness programs, or do you have any suggestions for doing that?
Yeah, so I would say it was actually To mention, Amanda Berlin again, she actually, and she's giving a talk on this at Circle City Con too. You might have seen it B-Sides Indies, where she instituted a phishing training program where she would fish people, and that's pretty popular right now. I work for a company that offers that as a service as well. There's Fish Me. That's obviously very popular, and it's a good start because you get into those training programs with people who will sit there and go, I don't need this, I don't click on phishing stuff, and then he's like, well, but you totally open this attachment and click these, you gave us this information, we phished you successfully, and you're telling us you don't need this training. But again, it depends on how it's done, I think. Just kind of like penetration testing can be really useful or a total wasted exercise depending on, and it really hinges on the report and then how it's handled at the end, because you can say, I found a bunch of stuff that's broken, or you need to do all this stuff, but if you don't really explain why or give them a good reason why they should be scared or why any of it matters, they'll just pay you when you go away. Kind of with the training too, if you focus very specifically on, well, don't click on LinkedIn things if you don't recognize the person. Just because they say that they endorsed you, why don't you just go to LinkedIn instead and see if someone endorsed you. Don't click on the links. That's great until they get a really convincing looking Amazon receipt or something like that, where like, yeah, please come in and log into your Google account, and they go like, oh, this looks just like Google, and they log in and they don't realize they've been phished, because most of the time it's not obvious in the end, right? They just get sent to the website they expect to see, or there's an error or something, and they try again, it works, and they never realize it.
What about awareness for things like people going to the Huffington Post that, it's not something they clicked on, it's not something that was fished out to them? I mean, how do you give them awareness without scaring them to even go on the internet for anything?
Yeah, I've been thinking about that a lot. That was, I know some people in IRC, I'll repeat it too, for like the people in IRC that are watching. So how do you train people that go to a place like the Huffington Post and, without just scaring them that like, well, you didn't click on anything, but you're still going to get infected? That's definitely very difficult, and I haven't found a very good solution for it. That is something that I think the community itself can employ. Obviously, one good step would be like, well, just install ad block on everyone's computer, but then you just kill the website, and that's not, that's kind of an unethical move and, not good for the media. But then you could argue, well, then maybe the media needs to move away from the advertising model, but then that's a whole other conversation of how, users don't want to pay for access to the website, so then it doesn't work, and it becomes a really big problem. And it's definitely difficult. The best solution I've come up with is just trying to make them aware that the internet is something they should be more mindful of, rather than, well, I just go to the Huffington Post and it's totally fine because it's not a shady website. But make them understand that legitimate websites can be compromised, can serve you malware. So if you go to the Huffington Post and maybe you see an update that says, hey, you should update Flash, don't update Flash unless you're searching for the Flash update from Adobe or going through Flash on your computer. Try to be mindful of more things like that. I honestly don't think there's a way to train the users to be aware or somehow defend themselves against something like happened with the Huffington Post with CryptoWall. And I think that's also why security researchers are scrambling, trying to figure out how they got into the ad network and got that campaign of theirs running, and also why CryptoWall was so quick to kill it and to save it for another day when they could find the new vulnerability.
Things like that might be just best practices on backing your data up and preparing
for
for something you can't prepare for.
That's a good point. Is just the fact that a lot of people don't back up, or they look to Dropbox for their backup, and now you have like TeslaCrypt that's purposely going after backups, or they use a network PC for their backup to educate them that it would at least be a good practice for you to have an off-site backup, even if it's just a hard drive you keep on your desk, something that's not connected to the computer at all times.
I already did that to Kyle's file server, took it over, got the private key if you need it.
I think at some point there's diminishing returns for awareness, right? I mean, you can get to a certain point, and you should, but at some point we have a security team, or you have to work at other solutions, right?
Yeah, definitely. That's why I definitely wanted to talk about that last example with the Instagram example, because those kids probably still would have taken the pictures. They still would have shared them around. No one really came out of that. Like, actually, the Atlantic kind of has, that article kind of ends on a more dour note, because the school administration tried really hard, worked with the sheriff department, like, all right, we're going to put on like a whole night with the students and family, have like a family night. We're going to come in, we're going to explain how this happened and what they probably should have done to be safe online. And would it have been any good? Maybe not. Maybe it would have been great, but no one showed up, because the only night they could do it was 2 nights before the homecoming game. And so everyone went and they were tailgating, watching football practice. Like, no one showed up to the auditorium. So it was, no one really learned much out of that. And would the teenagers really been very receptive of that sort of training and education after they just went through that? Probably not.
Do you think that they might have stayed with them a little bit longer had they been punished as felons?
Yeah.
I mean, yeah, probably.
Because they weren't punished at all.
If-
It's kind of like a whoops, my bad.
Sure, yeah, it's
Do it again.
so that is that. So it is still an open case. So it is my understanding that they are still trying to find the people who actually who are responsible, like kind of the big ones that are responsible for the Instagram accounts. From the article, right now, I think the lead that the police have was that it sounds like it was the idea of one of the boys' older brother, who was like 2 years older than had graduated, came back and was talking like, here's what you should do. So it was like a collaboration between the older brother, the little brother, and like the little brother's friend. So they think they have like 3 people that are kind of the brains behind it, that started the whole thing, that maybe they'll be punished in the end, but it'd also be probably next to impossible to prove at this point. Had they been caught maybe like red-handed, like they had the login, somehow proven that it was them, I think there probably could have been something out of it to punish them, because of, what they were doing was obviously well above just sharing the pictures. But at the same time, I got off track a second ago. What I was saying is they probably would have made these mistakes anyways, and they're stupid teenagers. They're going to make these kind of mistakes. But kind of the worst thing that we can do for people in that position where they make a dumb mistake is to label them like a sex offender for the rest of their life. Like, something like that will destroy them for the rest of their lives. So how could you punish the kids in this situation where they felt it without, making it so it really stuck with them for the rest, like actually well beyond teaching them a lesson? I don't know. And that's... So yes, if they had been punished, I think they would have learned, probably, definitely wouldn't do it again, would think twice about it, but...
There's a huge cost to that too. You get on the sex offender registry, most likely if it's child porn, if you're tried as an adult, that's on their record forever. There's no getting out of that. Their future employers are going to see it. They're going to have a hard time getting a job. It's child porn. You're not talking about something with adults. You're talking about children. You want to seriously destroy the rest of your life to do something with kids. And there's no hiding. And think of the mass quantity of people you have to punish. You can track them all down and figure out what's appropriate for each person. Each person gets labeled. The rest of your life is kind of in shambles.
Kind of the scary takeaway from this too is that, like, the reason I mentioned the Texas study in comparison to what the kids were saying is the kids were claiming that 60-80% of the school were involved in this, that, or at least were taking pictures and sending them to people even if they didn't know about the Instagram account. That's probably an exaggeration. That's way too high, but also could be more of a limit, kind of a tunnel vision of like, no, I'd say 68% of like the people I associate with, there's probably a whole lot of the school that they didn't even think about. And so if that study was accurate, of say about a third of the kids actually admitted to doing it, kind of when asked for the study. So like a third of that school was at least involved in self-production of child pornography. And to punish them would be kind of an insane task to take on, to be, like she mentioned, kind of to track them all down and find a proper punishment of what they did. But because I think the big thing for them is to actually learn where the mistake was, which is why I think if we could in some way punish the kids who actually created the Instagram account, who had that idea, I'm like, no, what you actually did was post public child pornography on the web. This was in no way private. This is probably archived somewhere. It's actually still out there, and what you've done, reasons, and try to actually explain to them what the result of their actions were, maybe. But again, kind of hard to teach a group like that. But it's also why I call them kind of our most vulnerable group right now. They don't want to learn about it, but they're using it, and they're also kind of recording everything they do and everything their friends do, and they don't understand what they're doing with any of that recording, any of those pictures, anything like that, and where it might end up.
Any other questions? Discussion?
All right, thanks, guys.
Just a reminder, last 2 this month, we'll have our misec social.